Welcome back, joined by Mette Ehlers Mikkelsen, and we're going to dive in about one of my favorite destinations and then learn about her incredible career, family, so many travels. I'm excited for this one. Faroe Islands, you were just there. I feel like if you loved Iceland, it's how many times better in my bias. So tell us about it and the experience of Faroe Islands 2020.
I will. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just came back from the Faroe Islands. I went there with my three kids, who are like 12, 17, and 19. And going hiking there were kind of a cool experience, mostly because the nature is so rough and so beautiful with the green mountains and the puffins. But also because the kids have become so big that now they could actually be the ones helping me. So whenever I thought I was going to fall over a cliff or something, I would have somebody with much better balance than me. He's sort of just giving me a hand and, leading me on. Or if I thought that now I felt pity for myself because we've been hiking for so long, there would always be someone with more energy who could sort of take the lead and push us forward to the destination. So that was actually kind of cool.
I think many of us, myself included, have been daunted by the costs of Faroe Islands, with some of the accommodation options, some of the meals are costly, and we probably had shorter visits than we wished we had. How long was your trip, and which of the islands were you able to visit?
We went for 8 days. That was approximately what I thought I could afford. I would love to go for a longer time. 8 days gave us the possibility to be at the sort of the main island with Tórshavn. It gave us the possibility to be to the next sort of two big islands, Vaga with the airport, and also to go all the way to Klaksvík, and from there on with the boat to Kalsoy. And that island is the one where the new James Bond movie is partly filmed. So I kind of had to go to that particular place, go to Kalua Lighthouse, which is just this wildly crazy photographed lighthouse placed at the very top of that particular island, and just go hiking there, get to the lighthouse, because lighthouses are always located these amazing places with amazing view. And then I'm going to look forward to the next James Bond movie and be a little bit like, oh, I was there as well.
What's interesting is I've been to a number of film locations where we know it from the film or show, and you see it in real life, and it can be either spectacular or it can be like, I can't believe that they thought of doing that. I'm thinking of, say, some of the Star Wars sites in Tunisia. There's one, it's a desert scene, but it's actually an ocean beach house. It's just the way they held the camera was just above the ocean line. So you think you're in the middle of total desert when you're really at somebody's abandoned beach home. So I'm curious what you'll think when you see the Bond movie when it does come out, if it really captures that or not. But talk about some of the practicalities, the accommodation you guys use, meals, what you did about, or camping. I'm not sure how
I think the camping would be a bit like seeing the tent fly off somehow, with being a wet tent flying off somewhere. No, what we actually did was the way I've been traveling for years now to sort of keep the cost down, make it a bit more local. So we used Airbnb. Because with 3 kids, that still makes it possible to have one accommodation instead of trying to be in a hotel where they would charge me for 2 double rooms or something like that. So it definitely keeps the cost down for us. That also makes it possible to go to a normal supermarket, buy normal groceries, buy fish from the Faroe Islands or lamb. They've got so many sheep that somehow you got to eat fish and lamb there. And then just cook ourselves in the evenings, and have a normal cereal and, whatever bread and sausage you could find for lunch, for picnics. So for us, that was a pretty fair way to have whatever the locals have, and at the same time eat well and do it much cheaper than if we've gone to the restaurants. I would have loved to, if I had far too much money, I would have probably, and no more destinations I wanted to go in the world and use my money for, I would probably have gone to one of those amazing restaurants at a Michelin level where they've, done this amazing food with a new Nordic kitchen and all the local sort of weird small specialities. But we kind of saved that instead. We actually did have one place that was pretty spectacular, and that was in the island of Mykines. And I would recommend that to anyone. Marit's house, which is the local guest house and local Airbnb. And Marit is just actually a local lady who's really cute and sweet and want to help. But for us, that meant that at this island of Mykines, where they've got all the puffin colonies, that is the place really to see the puffins. They've got about 350,000 couples mating at this moment. Pretty much the same with various other birds as well.
Michael in the comments was asking if you sampled the air dried rotten shark meat.
No, we're actually infamous in our circle of friends for always eating really weird food. But this particular time, we stayed away from eating puffins and stuff like that.
Okay.
No, but Mykines is a travel tip, I would say, because normally most people, they get to sail there and sail back after a couple of hours. So they just about have maybe 4 or 5 hours to hike the island, see the puffins, and go back. And the ferry is canceled every time it's bad weather, and that's quite often, even in the middle of high summer. So even during June, July, the ferry will be canceled every once in a while. So you can never take it in the last bit of your trip because you risk missing your plane home. So what we did was simply book 2 nights there, because then we were pretty sure we had all of it to ourselves for hours before the other came.
And did you use the helicopter network at all?
No.
So the ferries did work, and clearly it's open for tourism. I'm curious about these far-flung destinations in a sense. How does the Faroe Islands exist? If you were the news reporter just talking to Danes on the street of your hometown, and you asked them about Faroe Islands, what would they say?
I think most of the Danes would know that the Faroe Islands is somewhere up there, and it's a little far away. It's really cold. It's green. There's a lot of fish, and it's part of Denmark. So, and that's what you would start by saying in Denmark, I gather. As a former diplomat, I would probably add that they're part of Denmark in the way that they're part of our universities and hospitals and have access to that. But they're not part of the European Union, neither is Greenland. So they can trade freely around the world. And the rest of the EU are not going to fish in their waters. And that they've managed to handle so well in the Faroe Islands, that they can afford to build all of these tunnels between the islands. And with the weather as cold and windy and everything as they have it, the tunnels you'll come to appreciate when you're driving around there, because a trip or two with the ferry going sort of up and down, kind of appreciate the tunnels somehow after a few days.
Yeah, it was an incredible road network, and in my experience, I did not take the ferries, but I drove around quite a bit, and I've heard a fair number of travelers have managed to have accidents. So it's a curving road network, and especially if you rent the smallest car, I guess the winds can really push you if you're not paying attention.
I was fairly concentrated every once in a while, so we made an agreement that I would do all the driving, and then the older kids would do the groceries and cook when we got back in the evening, so I could relax a little bit.
Fantastic. And there must be insights. I mean, there's not a language obstacle. I would say for English-speaking tourists, the Faroes are an easy destination, but there must be insights or comments or jokes that you experienced as a Dane visiting that we don't have access to? So is there a slang that you all from mainland Denmark are referred to as, or any joke?
Well, some of the words that they use is actually, mean something completely different in Danish.
Oh, okay.
Which really makes it sound like they're peeing in the bus or peeing in the newspaper, which makes us think it's hilarious and, well, it's completely lost on the locals.
Okay.
But I think mostly, actually, I was impressed with the fact that I could get on a plane in the middle of a Corona period, fly for two and a half hours, get out of the plane, have a Corona test, and being met with people speaking Danish, going to a supermarket with all kind of Danish groceries, prices in Danish and in Danish currency, and mostly being met with actually people really being friendly and kind of liking the Danes. It could also be a more sort of reserved response of kind of the colonial powers of a country that are not really welcomed or only partly welcomed. But this one is one where I kind of looked at the kids and said, this is not something that we should just take for granted. That this is also us having done something right, kind of. We can be proud of this also in an international context. And for me, trying to put a perspective on that for them was that the Danish and German border is also placed where it is after a referendum, not a war.
Oh. Well, expand on that. So it's a history that people might know very high level or not at all. So talk about the Danish-German border.
Well, in the southern part of Denmark, you actually have a small area where Denmark is just for once not an island, but actually connected to the rest of Europe. That particular part have over many years and during history sort of changed a little bit as to where was the border actually placed. And at some point, around 100 years ago-ish, we actually held a referendum, and it placed the border where it is now. And you've got minorities on both sides of the border. You've got German minorities in north of the border in Denmark and vice versa. You've got Danish schools south of the border, a Danish political party there, German schools in the north part. But still, everybody has respected that border. It's not been, there hasn't been anyone saying, okay, we'll change it again, we'll have another referendum, or we'll shoot somebody and change it. And you even have a small research facility in the neighborhood saying, what can we actually learn from this? Could somebody else learn from this as well internationally?
Fantastic. I once had a business trip up to Flensburg near the border on the German side there, and was around there for a couple of days. So it was interesting to experience that area. Now, many of us world travelers have a huge blind spot about our home country, and you can ask us about so many destinations that give advice, but you ask about home country and haven't been to the Grand Canyon or whatever you hear that. So, but you've also been a diplomat in your career, so you must have that tourism promotion ability. So for the travelers in our group that go beyond the famous and iconic to a bit more obscure or quirky, what are a few spots in Denmark that you can recommend?
I would say the Viking Museum. So everything related to the Vikings basically is kind of cool. And there's quite a few spots on that, and it's pretty easy to Google your way into finding those old Viking villages and Viking ships and stuff like that. Then I'd say the Freedom Museum, everything connected to Second World War, I think is pretty interesting as well. Where you've got the bunkers all the way up the sort of west coast of Jutland, pointing towards the UK, because the British were going to help us when we were occupied by Germany during Second World War. And those bunkers and everything that's still there, that actually today accounts for some pretty cool museums and pretty cool sites. Also the fact that once in a while we would make ships go, hit the ground, and so we could rob the lot out of them. So we've also got a little bit harsher history going there. And in the other part of the country, you'll have the history of some of the castles, and it being a kingdom. So you have the castle where Shakespeare said that Hamlet was placed and wrote that entire story of to be and not to be. And from that one castle, you could actually shoot all the way to Sweden, so you could make sure that any ship that passed by there would remember to pay taxes to Denmark, so we could become a rich country.
Yeah. And of course, your dining scene has become famous, and of course, I speak of the hot dogs. So the can I get a good hot dog just about anywhere in the country, or is there a spot or two that absolutely go out of your way?
Well, those that I know that I think is the best would be in the center of Copenhagen, in the old sort of meat district. That have become fairly cool, I think, and they've got some good sites for that.
And for those, the very famous fine dining establishments that have, I think it's probably been a surprise for Danes to suddenly have these foodie types over the past, what is it, decade plus now, 2 decades, suddenly turning up. But is there a culture of humor around those, or pride, or people, do Danes actually go eat at them?
Yeah, they do. Well, definitely those that are willing to pay for it and can afford to. Yeah, people do. And it's kind of an adventure to do so, or sort of kind of a big experience, I'd say. We have some amazing chefs. I shared a house with one of them, Søren Celine, for a long time, and what they are capable of doing, and sort of the entire experience in one taste or one dish, that's pretty amazing. But what I like about them mostly is actually that they do the storytelling. It's always the stories that make up for a good experience, the stories we tell afterwards, whether it's the perfect person we met in Papua New Guinea, or it's the perfect food we had somewhere. And they tell the story about Denmark and Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, and used the fish and the vegetables from particularly our part of the world. So in that way, I think it's become a pretty big part of our culture, and telling the story about who we are and where we come from.
Fantastic. And Denmark has produced many great travelers, and I've heard of the famous Travelers Café Globen in Copenhagen that you're part of in the Danish Travelers Club. So tell us about those.
Yeah, I'm sitting with the coffee cup from the Travelers Club, actually, saying something like, I'm well traveled, what are you? Within this connection, I kind of know the answer for you, so I thought I could do it. Now, I think when I was going back from my my second posting with the Foreign Service, and I thought, this is the time where I'm going to leave the Foreign Service. I'll stop being posted abroad around the world for half of the time for the rest of my working life. So in order to settle and not just be really restless and end up applying for the UN right away, I thought, I'm going to find a community where all of the others as well have this interest in the world, and where normal have a slightly broader definition. So I joined the Travelers Club, and that was definitely where my traveling exploded from there, because I got all of these great people around me, and everybody inspired me to go to a new place. And then I could go to 5 different places and approximately 1 trip by doing something particular. And it was just really inspiring. So that sort of set me off from living and working abroad and traveling a lot to really speeding up my travel almost exponentially. And at that time as well, the cafe in Copenhagen, the Travelers Café Globen, was one of the first places I came.
Mm.
And I actually came for a writing course. I wanted to write something personal. I was used to be in a newspaper being interviewed on export possibilities on different markets for Danish companies, how to get into the EU when you're Estonia, sort of. So for me, work stuff. And I really wanted to give some more of myself and tell about something that I was really passionate about, and that was traveling. So I started on a writing course there, and I really liked the place. I liked the atmosphere, so I kept on. And today, both me, my boyfriend that I've actually met in the club, and one of my 3 kids are also, all of us are shareholders in the cafe.
Okay.
It's more of a, I don't know, one of those donations you give that you never expect to get anything from, but the cool experience of saying you're part owner of a bar. And I'm part of the board as well. I'm a bartender once in a while. I never saw that coming. But that's actually really fun. And then I do a lot of the bookings. So if any of the Globetrotters that sees this will be around Copenhagen, I'm the one to contact and see if you'll make a free presentation on wherever you come from or you're traveling. We pay heavily in 3 beers per lecture.
Fantastic. And do you is that the beer served before, during, or after the lecture? I guess.
That is a free choice.
I'm curious about your experience in the Foreign Service, and we have lots of young people in the group that a lot of what they thought they were going to be doing the next year or two is looking very different and disrupted. For each country more or less has some option. Tell us about your experience, where you went, the pros and cons.
Yeah, well, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to do something with the world, and I wanted to travel the world, and I really, really wished that I could make a positive difference somehow. And for me, that went from political science into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Already I studied international relations. I studied European integration. So I already there sort of started in that direction. I spent as much time with my student scholarship abroad that I possibly could. So I think my professor talked about academic tourism every time he saw me. That was the one thing I knew about. That was how to get my scholarship with me abroad the most. So I went to Brussels, worked at NATO. I went to a security political think tank in Washington. I went to the Ural Mountains in Russia and did skiing there and called it research. I was very proud about that one. And then I started in the Foreign Service when I was 24 and just graduated.
I've got to ask about NATO, because I think I passed the headquarters on the airport bus to the airport, but it's one of those that, say, like when I see the Pentagon in Washington D.C., I just wonder what is it like inside? Is it really cool, or is it just really boring and the same as every other office? Or
well, the topic of what you do is really cool, and the offices are really boring. And at that time, it was still sort of hardcore, old-fashioned security with disk drives and, enormous security boxes in your office and everything. It was kind of cool that way. But it was an office like everything else. I might as well have been in the European Union or in the UN. But I really loved being at NATO, and I still think the transatlantic relationship and securing peace in the world somehow is an amazingly important and meaningful thing to do. So I still really appreciate doing that.
Fantastic. So you're entering the Foreign Service. I know from some U.S. Foreign Service officers I've known that the U.S. tradition is your first assignment is the place where they think you will like the least. So it'll be like the visa office in the country they think you won't enjoy because they don't want you to be too sympathetic. They want you to apply the rules of the visas. But it's really tough, and some people luck out, and I think the bosses guess wrong, and they actually end up sending you someplace you love and you stay forever. So just curious how it all works in your case.
Well, my friends who was in the State Department always completely envied how we were able to manage to do this because, of course, Denmark and the Danish Foreign Service being so much smaller, I got to be responsible for so many things from my first posting, and they were like, "You cannot possibly hold this responsibility. You're so young." But I got to actually try out all the theory in praxis already from my first posting. I went to Estonia, and I'd done my master thesis both in the UK and in Denmark on how Estonia became part of the EU and part of NATO, and how we enlarged, and how that sort of whole transformation of the world went, or of Europe. So, and I got to help them become part of EU and become part of NATO. As my first posting. So still to this day, I think maybe I started with doing one of the most meaningful jobs I will get to do my entire work life.
And what is it like where you said you're very young and suddenly you have this job of enormous responsibility and feeling of weight that the smaller Foreign Service allows, but it's a lot of pressure. How do you take that on and make that succeed?
Well, you're still a part of a really old organization with traditions and procedures and everything. So even though you're young and you're responsible for something that sounds really independent, you're also part of something where the methods are really well tested. So I think I was in pretty good hands, but I got more freedom when it had to do with export promotion. And that was also the part I came to love and appreciate, because it gave more freedom of what to do, find a great possibility, find a market opportunity for a Danish company, something that would benefit both Estonia and Denmark, like cooperation in IT, digitalization on the public sector, which is actually what I still do, just in a new setting. So I think I kind of try to find my way to wherever there's a possibility of being a little bit innovative and a little bit creative, and work with the newest technologies and see if we could make a difference in new ways. So that was really what I loved. But I still have this feeling of the first posting being like your first boyfriend, kind of like somebody you never forget, somewhere you never forget. So Estonia is still my favorite country in the world. I speak some of the language, and I have a
famously difficult language, right?
Ja, ma riigikeelistä keeles natukene. Se on vaikka raske keelessä, vaikka vaikka huvitav. It makes no sense.
The economics blog, Marginal Revolution, recently did I've got to find the link and put in the show notes. The difficulty and the implications for economic development of having a very difficult language, and it was an interesting post. But so, what was that transition like? You were part of a momentous transition for a very small country that is defined in so many ways by giant powers wanting to push it around, and they have this incredible reputation for technology, digitization, scrappiness, resourceful, staying alive, right? I mean, that's
they have, and it's well deserved. They're amazing at that. They're literally amazing. They skipped I don't know how many phases of technology and put their entire democracy online and in the cloud pretty much overnight. So even when I was first posted there around the turn of the century, literally, there would be road signs saying, you 200 meters in that direction, there's internet connection. And you'd be in a tiny, tiny village and you'd be like, there's no way they've got an internet connection yet. Because that was before even mobile phones. But they had. And that made it possible for them to build a sort of a welfare state without really having the funds for it. And they did lots of things. They suggested to the European Union that they would have the euro way before the EU thought that was a good idea, and they were ready for it. So they literally did everything possible to become an EU country and a NATO country, and get away from the history of being a Soviet country. I think they managed pretty awesome, actually. Also, very little corruption, so that's pretty amazing. And they did that by getting really close, among others, to the Scandinavian countries. And all of the Scandinavian countries know the feeling of having big neighbors and being small countries and wanting to be really pragmatic on development. So I kind of loved them doing that. They didn't want to find their own way. They were like, okay, we'll take all of the best practices and we'll implement them because that'll be fast.
I'm curious that having casinos in the main city center wouldn't strike me as the natural solution to such a prosperous and well functioning place. I'm curious about that and how it works.
I think it's okay. To me, that's just okay in a free country, and if people can't handle it, they'll get help either by police or social authorities. But to me, that's fine.
I'm just thinking of, say, the example of Singapore, where, as I understand, there's a lot of restrictions on locals in terms of what they can participate. And then I think of, say, examples in the U.S. like Atlantic City, or it's just a very challenged place economically, and the casino model hadn't worked. So when I saw Tallinn, that was the first thing I thought of, is, oh, there's casinos right in the middle, and it struck me of how prosperous and happy and well functioning it looked. Where my bias was thinking, oh, casinos, like in the U.S., it's like what a city does when there's no other tax base left is like, oh, now we'll find a way to get a casino or gambling in place.
That's actually true. I've seen that as well. But coming from Denmark, where you also have casinos in the middle of the capital,
yeah,
I never had a second thought about that.
Fantastic. And, you mentioned being an export advisor, and that's an area of foreign service that I think people may not be as aware of. When I was in college, I interned for a summer at the U.S. Commercial Service office in Shanghai, and it was just a friend in Shanghai had said, oh, this is what these guys do. And I truly had no idea the U.S. government had even this, but these are both foreign service officers and contractors that have much more of a business focus. So I'm assuming that's similar to what you did, and talk about that as a way for the business focus to get into public service as well.
Yeah, I really like that part because it gave the possibility to think like a business person and help Danish companies. And Denmark is a small open economy. We're trading people. So it's not a sort of heavily mineral country. We've got oil in the North Sea, but beside that, this is not a place of gold mines or something like that. So we've always been trading, and then we produce a lot of medicine. And those areas of expertise are highly specialized, and it takes both high levels of education, and it takes a lot of traveling and a lot of doing business in every country in the world. So for me, that was also part of getting to travel. I took all of our export advisors for the biggest, most global Danish companies to China on a course at one point, because I thought, there's no way we could be really global export advisors unless we know this particular market. And at that time, it was still that much newer than it is today. So it was one of those areas where you could actually make a difference. And there's two kind of Danish companies to that. There's the small ones that need to learn how to export, which is very much leadership and the business support and advice job. And then there's the biggest, most global ones like Lego, the toys, or Novo Nordisk and all the other medical.
Have you been saying it wrong the whole time? All of our lives? The company name?
In Danish, it's pronounced Lego.
Oh my goodness! You've upended my childhood.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, no, but for the bigger ones, it's more sort of opening markets, the branding part, even bringing the royal family or the prime minister, doing that stuff like that. So it's a bit bigger, but both things makes a lot of sense. It's really important for the country. It's important for the companies, and for me, it became sort of the way also to change from the foreign service into becoming a business CEO and a board member, a professional board member in different smaller companies working internationally. And for me, that also make it possible to work a little bit more as a digital nomad, work when I'm traveling, still have all of my board meetings while I'm traveling around the world. And that is definitely part of how I've been able to travel almost full time for a year.
Oh, wow. And when people think digital nomad, they're thinking like design artist and these kinds of things, not board member. So expand a bit about on that. And I realized that the requirements and the culture of board members it varies dramatically country to country. So if you can contextualize in terms of with Danish companies or other countries.
Yeah, well, two of the places that I traveled last year, I really used my sort of business profile. First, I visited a friend in Ghana, a Danish company, a Danish-Swedish company, actually. I was also posted in Sweden for 4 years, doing export promotion, and absolutely loved it. Not very exotic for a Dane, but definitely one of our biggest markets. And him working for a Danish-Swedish company, I thought I have to meet him. So I went to the northern part of Ghana, and he said to me, "Oh, I'm buying shea nuts in Ghana with the local ladies in the villages. Come visit me and we'll go see." And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. When I came, it actually turns out that they had put about 250,000 women in jobs by harvesting shea nuts. So it was part of a huge international sort of sourcing chain. And these women get maybe between 20 and 50% of their annual income by this source. And it's the women who harvest. It's the women who get the income. It's the women who get the microfinancing. So they also get a completely different status in the family of being able to reinvest this into something else that will provide more food for the family, more health for the kids, and more education for the kids. So they simply invest it much smarter than the men does. And of course, every time women get a chance for education and a bit of money and a bit of independence, they get fewer kids, and they make sure they get better education. So it's incredibly well for global problems of development and overpopulation. So I really loved seeing this, actually. And then I went on to Malawi. A friend of mine knew so many local entrepreneurs, and some I was like, I don't really believe in this. Especially one of them just blew me away. I thought, he's so good. And he was trying to already there do a lot of microfinancing, and had about 150, 200 families that he helped with the microfinancing scheme that was completely without international assistance, but just his business model. I thought that was kind of amazing, and I wanted to help him do that. So today, among others, the friend from Ghana and a Danish businessman who worked in the entire region for a long time, and I are still helping him out. And I expect us to be able to assist him in growing this scheme immensely. So sometimes sort of this traveling a lot and being used to see opportunities like that also helps. And I don't know, it's something that makes me proud once in a while when it's possible.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so many of us just go as a tourist and don't only think as a tourist, and you're seeing a destination with so many perspectives.
I like that part. But you always see destination from, I don't know, both with what you have professionally and with your studies, or the context you come in. And these places, I traveled solo. But over from November to February, I traveled with my friend Jakob, who's also a globetrotter, and we traveled for 100 days around the world. That was a completely different way of traveling because we were together. I had my kids travel with us for two periods during that trip, and when I travel with the kids, I'm met in a completely different way when I travel.
Sure.
I don't get as many sort of wedding propositions when I travel with 3 children, for example. And traveling in, Tunisia or in Morocco, if it's a young Arab man, I get sick and tired of them and start shouting at them after a while when I lose my patience. Where when it was the old sort of Berbian culture, the men would look at me like, oh, she's the head of the family. She comes with the 3 kids. We'll negotiate with the mother. Apparently, she's the matriarch of this place. And that would be something completely different. And I kind of really like differently, depending on whether I travel with both my parents and my children, or alone as a woman or a business person. And that's also part of I think the experience to do that a little bit differently from each country.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, imagining you maybe shouting in Estonian. If Estonian seemed like a good language to shout.
Well, then Danish is pretty harsh as well. It's in the pronunciation, so that kind of make an impression as well.
Speak about you got so many different layers of travel with family. You mentioned traveling with your parents. So what are the travels and that you found meaningful with them, and what makes it work socially, logistically? We all have complicated families.
Well, I travel with them like my entire life. Okay. I think it's from them that I've got this. I'd rather have a smaller apartment and no car once in a while, and then travel a lot. They always took us on at least 2 good foreign trips when I was a kid. A lot in Europe, a lot in Scandinavia. I've seen the Northern Lights and the Midnight Sun together with them in the far north, and pretty much everything else. And then when I became older, I brought them to South Africa for a month on a road trip. Last time when they were that much older and didn't want to travel that far, we just did a weekend in Latvia together. And then I would go both with them and the kids. At some point, I went to Tunisia with them because my father said that this was where the Romans said, and at some point I want Carthago to be destroyed. And for that particular sort of historic quote, he decided for us to go there. So it's always a bit of...
Yes, I had the same motivation.
See? Makes sense. I tried to get him to go to Petra in Oman. He was like, I was a UN soldier in the Gaza in 1966. I almost didn't, I was one of the last ones to get out before the 6-day war. I've been to Israel, been to Egypt, I've been to Jordan. Now I would like to see where Carthago was. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So yeah, we try to mix it in with the historic interests. And then of course, that I share very much with him. So if we can find anything having to do with Second World War or history on my postings, we're both very happy.
Oh, fantastic. And the expanding on the family travel, and I'm sharing your Instagram account in the links, and you've got the header, "Wish to give my kids the world." So we meet many family travelers where sometimes it feels like the kids are the prop to put on Instagram, but you seem to be doing the reverse of really focused on showing the world to them, not showing them to the world.
Yeah, and that comes by itself, because a lot of sort of Instagram traveling families, they have smaller kids. So you have the picture perfect family of mom and dad and 2 small kids and they all look adorable and happy. But then the kids are also too small to veto that mom and dad throws them on Facebook and Instagram all the time. I actually had my first trip around the world in 2006 till 7. I did a travel blog at the time that I later sort of merged into my new travel blog when I started doing that again about 10 years later. And there are pictures, and there are a lot of pictures. And my older kids, when I was 17 and 19, they're like, Mom, if we'd known this, we would have not let you do that. And to this day, still, they're not particularly happy about me putting pictures of them online. So we have an agreement just for my sake, because I really love sharing travel stories. And I'm always so sad if I can't tell that I shared them with my kids. So every evening when we travel, or once in a while, I will show them my pictures, and they would put sort of preferred picture on those that are okay to put on social media. And if there's nothing that are approved, I just have to live with that. So that's actually a part of a deal. I think you have to respect that. These are young adults. They need to create their own life, and it should not be me trying to promote who I am or what I want to do by
Mom's not allowed to be cooler than they are, right?
Yeah. So that's something different by having that much older kids. And it comes sometimes while they're teenagers, but I also think it's something really worth respecting. I would have expected the same of my parents, and definitely demanded the same thing. And then, of course, it's also get more complicated when you get older. I divorced 3-4 years ago, among others, because I really wanted to travel much more than I wanted the house and the car and everything. And just life just throws you curveballs sometimes. So for me to keep traveling and keep traveling with the children, that also demanded of me to basically have enough of jobs, board jobs next to it, really prioritizing my finances so that this was possible. And for me to be able to do that on a one income plus 3 kids and 40 new countries for each kid over the last 3 years, that's kind of an accomplishment I'm pretty proud of. And of course, had I saved all that money for just traveling the world by myself, I would probably be far closer to the 195 instead of the 153 right now. But I wouldn't trade it.
Fantastic. And you clearly think systematically about, is this a trip with all 3 kids? Is this one? I think you said in your 100-day trip, there were 2 segments where different configurations of the family participated as well as solo. So talk about how you're coming up with this.
Oh, I think that's where getting older, I'm not that old, but still get some other limitations. So I have maybe more money, but less time than I did when I was backpacking in my 20s. And the older kids were in high school, they were in college. They didn't want to take time out because they wanted to make good grades. They wanted to go into biochemistry and study Chinese and international business and everything. So they also have their own life plans, and they absolutely want to travel, but they want to travel during school holidays. And the fact that they're also living with their dad, sort of taking one week with each of us, exchanging, and then we divide holidays and everything. So I also have to plan with him, and we have to agree. And then there's something else. If you travel as a single parent, either because you just decide only to travel one, or because you're divorced, or because you're widowed, you actually have to have a permission in a lot of countries, because they want to make sure that you're not, kidnapping your kids or doing human trade. So especially countries like South Africa, where there's a lot of human rights people, lawyers, civil, NGOs, working on civil society advice, stuff like that. They also went to Namibia and Botswana, They just came one country north in Africa, and then they stopped. Then the rest of the countries north of that has no rules. But just those countries, they really had a lot of sort of international, this is how you have to do it. This is very important. You have to do something about it. So but last year, when I brought the children to Namibia, and we went on an overland cruise, sleeping in tents everywhere around nature, from Namibia, Botswana, and then Zimbabwe, Zambia, around the waterfall. That was an amazingly cool trip. And I just thought, oh, this is going to be so easy because there's no real complicated visas in these areas and they're pretty safe. And then only like 2 weeks before I was going to leave, and I paid the bills, I paid the flight tickets and the tents and everything, I realized that they are so specific on the kids. And I made one of those sort of little smart trips where I went before. I went to Angola. I went to the Red Desert in Namibia because it's amazing. And then the kids would fly down and meet me in Windhoek in Namibia. But that also meant that they needed so many papers for the Namibian border control in the airport to allow them in, and allow for the 18-year-old boy to bring in his 2 sisters with no parents at all. And a vague explanation that their weird globetrotting mom was already in Namibia and would meet them in a hotel 8 hours later. And I was, of course, with no Wi-Fi whatsoever and really, really nervous. So I probably will still have to apologize to some fellow travelers from that particular safari for me talking way too much about my kids, because I was so nervous about it. And when we then went on from Namibia to Botswana and further on to Zimbabwe, they really needed to see the paperwork. And the kids' dad and I had to go to the court in Denmark. Not sort of, now we're fighting something, but to get the paperwork done, and both having to sign the papers with somebody official looking at us signing the papers and signing that these were actually the parents, both agreeing to the kids being allowed to make this trip. So it's rather complicated sometimes, and much, much more complicated than when I was just traveling with them as this sort of loving, picture perfect family when they were smaller.
I see.
Yeah.
Is there a resource, or where are you finding out this information? Oh my God, I need all this paperwork.
This has actually turned out to be much more difficult than so many other travel hacks, because normally I find all of my inspiration on how to travel the world. Well, if I want to go to Equatorial Guinea, I would look at every passport stamp as first place to look. I would talk to the others in the Frequent Travelers Club in Denmark. I would go to my wonderful Café Globen, and I would see if somebody else had done this before. I would check in Nomad Mania, that I'm also really amazed with and fascinated about registering everything in. But globetrotters are almost always men if they're traveling that wildly, and most of them without kids. And if people are traveling with kids a lot and telling about it, it's almost always small kids. So this is actually part of what I found that I almost had to figure out by myself. In that, like, there's a few other women who have Helle Granhøj, Skipper, who has traveled with their children for a long time, and also divorced, and also tried to figure this out. But most of the time it actually takes a lot of research, because it's not something where I found a travel community where a lot of people did that before me. But now, of course, I can share this with others, so it becomes easier for others as well.
And so this would apply to any case, whether the other parent is alive, not alive, still married, divorced, that one parent is taking children under 18 around the world.
Yes, and even if you take children under 18 around the world, or if you want the children to travel by themselves before they're 18. I also had a trip about a year and a half ago. We were going to celebrate my country number 100 in Dominican Republic, under the statue of Christopher Columbus with a cigar and a rum. I thought that was a pretty neat way of celebrating it. But again, I sort of underestimated the enthusiasm of my travel. So Jakob traveled first, and then the smaller one, Ella, and I traveled, and we went to Puerto Rico, St. Kitts and Nevis, and a couple of the others. And then the two older ones should come to Santo Domingo and meet up with us. And that was, again, before I realized that then they would have to travel being 16 and 17 years old through maybe Frankfurt, maybe London, and going to the Dominican Republic. And you can actually, at that point, I realized the first time that I couldn't buy airplane tickets to them just via Googling on Momondo and finding the cheapest tickets, because none of them were 18. So it took me quite a while to figure out how to even buy the ticket, how to check that all of the airlines, if they were going with one or two airlines on the way there, that not just one, but both airlines would be okay with minors traveling, and that they would not get problems in the transit airport either. Plus that they would have all of these papers from both the dad and me, that they were allowed to enter into the Dominican Republic. So when they arrived, I was sitting outside with a huge beer, being slightly nervous also at that point, thinking, I really hope they get in. And I want to be very close by. So if they call and they say we're in trouble and we're not getting in or something, I could be there and come and help. And of course, the kids come out 16, 17 years old, completely sort of cool and relaxed and being like, you didn't have to worry. Everything went fine. We're completely cool. Why are you always worrying like that? And I was like, but rather that than them coming sort of completely stressed, asking me what the heck I figured out this time. And last time I sent them home through China in the beginning of January. So I think with Corona, that was a close enough miss.
Oh, fantastic. We'll do rapid fire on 3 destinations I'm very curious about. Short, quick answer, the experience, your takeaway, something from it, the Trans-Mongolian Railway.
That was, I thought it was going to take a long time, and it turned out that the time went so fast. And I want to do it again. And instead of doing Trans-Mongolian, I want to go all the way to Vladivostok. I was completely fascinated with the way time went there.
Fantastic. Greenland?
The inland ice, the dogs, the culture, but definitely the nature and how small we are.
And in the biography you gave me, you submitted below water favorites, and you listed Fernando de Noronha, which I've heard it talk about the beach, birds, all of this. I even checked Google to see, the autocomplete, and the diving, anything underwater doesn't even pop up in the list. So what did we all miss?
I thought Fernando de Noronha was like the Galapagos of Brazil and of northern Brazil on the east coast. I thought there was this amazing little island where I went around with a surfer dude. The kids' dad were out diving most of the time, and I'm more snorkeling. So I took the kids who at that time the 2 older ones were 4 and 5. And we went with this guy who was a complete surfer dude in a beach boogie. And we went to this pool that there would be water in when it was a high tide and very little water when it was a low tide. And when it was a low tide, we would always capture not only amazing fish and corals, but also small reef sharks. So I actually got my kids in the small pool of water. It was pretty safe. And they got to snorkel before they were actually really able to snorkel with reef sharks, the small ones. It was really cool. But that was the first time that especially my son, who was 5-year-old at that time, he could just hold his breath for an incredibly long time, because that was such a cool adventure and such a cool experience. So
an incredible traveler, incredible business person, incredible parent. Thank you for joining us today, Mette.
Thank you for having me. It was a